Call this meeting to order. This is a special meeting, October 12th, 2020, for the York County School Board, and it's hard to believe that we're already almost right here in the middle of October already. As we continue to move forward in the school year, we do appreciate the families and their patience and flexibility in what we're doing with the new form of learning we're working with. So before we get started with our presentations, we do have one action item this evening, and it needs board approval. And it's a resolution 20-41, a resolution to approve specific school division procurement. Dr. Shandor, can you share information?
Thank you. Actually, yes, Mr. Boland, our Chief Finance Officer, is going to share some information related to this item. Mr. Boland.
Mr. Richardson, members of the board, two items on the resolution this evening requiring approval. The first is $79,900 for Seesaw, which is a computer program that will be used to complement our virtual instruction for our early learners, or elementary learners. And the second is $310,000, which is CIP related, and this is for the A&E design phase for the Seaford expansion project.
Okay, I just have one question. The Seesaw, that's a program to help with the elementary model instruction virtual, so they have more support, more resources.
It is. It's designed, I mean, all learners can use it, but it's really designed for our teachers. Actually, many of them have been using it for a long time. They really like it, and so it's one of those sought after resources that all of our teachers at the elementary school wanted. It provides an opportunity for our teachers and our students to engage back and forth, because our youngest learners are not really typing. It's not really, it's a way for them to show their knowledge in a way that's appropriate for their age level. Parents can also see it, and teachers can engage with them in that process.
Any other questions?
That $79,000 covers all 3 years. It's not a yearly process.
That's for the 3 years.
Okay. All right, if there's no other questions, I need a motion and a second to approve resolution 20-41 to approve the specific school division procurement.
I'll make a motion to approve 20-41 for the procurement of these two items.
All right, second. Thank you. Ms. Ward, if you would call the board, please.
Yes, a motion is made by Mr. Schaefer and seconded by Mr. Higginbotham to approve resolution 20-41. Mr. Hyatt?
Yes.
Mr. Higginbotham?
Yes.
Ms. Brock?
Yes.
Mr. Schaefer?
Yes.
And Mr. Richardson?
Yes.
Thank you. The motion passed 5-0.
Thank you, Ms. Ford. So we have several presentations this evening. The first one is operations reopening update, and Dr. Shandor, I'll let you share information.
Thank you, Mr. Richardson. I know that we are having some, I got pulled out for the meeting for just a minute. We are having some issues with our volume. So I want to acknowledge that to the audience that's out there, that I know they're having a difficult time hearing us. However, when the meeting started, the air conditioning just kicked on. So our team members will speak up, board members, if that's all right with you all as well, as we move through the meeting. All right, so our first presentation regarding the reopening update is going to be from operations. So Dr. Butler is going to review some of our updates and calendar modifications, followed by Dr. Wright reviewing updates on the elementary transition to in-person learning. And then I'm going to review some information related to our tentative target dates for bringing students back into the buildings. So I'll turn it over to Dr. Butler at this time.
Mr. Richardson, members of the board, and Dr. Shandor, thank you for this opportunity to provide some updates on operational topics. So for the opening of school this past week, drivers were able to welcome 50 K1 riders each day, and they ensured that they were there on time to our 10 elementary schools. Prior to the students returning for face-to-face instruction, drivers received training on COVID-19 awareness and on our cleaning procedures. All of our buses in the division, they were treated with a biostatic surface protectant that usually lasts a 90-day effectiveness window, and they were also disinfected with a quaternary solution to make sure that they were cleaned properly. Routes have been arranged to reduce capacity, and ensuring social distancing guidelines are followed. And then all of our buses have been equipped with touch-free sanitizing stations, as well as signage was posted to designated seats so that kids would be socially distanced during their ride. We also have, for our parent pickup procedures, each of our schools worked very hard on developing a plan for parent pickup, as well as drop-off procedures for students. As far as our safety procedures are concerned, our staff did greet students and families at both the parent pickup locations and bus loops at each school to help guide our students to the check-in locations to ensure that we're following our safety procedures. In addition to that, during our recess and classroom breaks, staff were able to stagger our student schedules and locations to maintain social distancing. Specifically, when it came to recess, they looked at equipment outside as well as locations for our kids on the blacktops in different areas to make sure they were put in small groups and were not all grouped together. So again, these are all guidelines that our teachers and our administrators followed to make sure our students were safe as they interacted outside. And then in addition to that, in our hallways, we made sure there was signage that had arrows and directions, as well as reminding them to wash their hands and to socially distance. In the classroom, we added some additional features. In our classrooms, our teachers, so they could provide small group instruction, plexiglass shields were installed and used in order to keep additional layer of safety for our students as they work with the teacher. And as I shared before, we made sure that there were directional arrows in all of our hallways to direct foot traffic and to make sure there was enough distance as much as possible. Our teachers also provided instruction to our students on proper hand washing, about maintaining respectful distances from their classmates. And they utilized the procedure we've been doing for the last 3 years. I had shared before that we've been using a positive behavior intervention system. And so with that, they had classroom expectations and rules that they were using prior to the COVID-19 pandemic. So now that they're back in the building, they're also using those same matrix that the kids are familiar with to talk about how they need to operate in the classroom and in the school. For example, over at Bethel Manor, they use the acronym, they keep kids respectful, safe, responsible. So they just added the COVID-19 safety procedures into those responsibilities so that kids understood what was expected when you're in the classroom, and then also when we're in the hallway, when we're outside at recess, so that it was all consistent with what the students already are familiar with. And then particularly for our staff, to make sure when the students came back, we added an extra module. So every year staff have to take the safe school trainings on different things such as bullying prevention, sexual harassment. We added some COVID-19 training modules for awareness and for cleaning, and all staff did have to view those videos before our students returned. And so those were the safety procedures we did put in place to make sure that it was a safe return for our students. For meal service, we provided breakfast and lunch. They were both delivered to the classrooms. However, the students did not go to the cafeteria, but we did have our staff drop those off to classrooms after they took orders from students. And so we also continued for those students who are learning remotely. On Monday and Thursdays, we still had meal pickup from the 4 YCSD locations. And we recently received some information from the U.S. Department of Education that they will be extending the free meals for school-aged children, which was a flexibility waiver, through June the 30th, 2021. For attendance at our school, student attendance numbers were consistent with the number of students who did select the flexible learning option. And so our schools welcomed between 45 to 75 children last week for face-to-face instruction. And that was per school. As far as some feedback that we got from our schools from the opening, student arrival and dismissal was very smooth and efficient. Students were excited to see their classmates and their teachers, and they also made sure they practiced appropriate social distancing and wore their masks as required by our return plan. Moving forward, we are looking forward to the return of our 2nd and 3rd grade students following that same procedure and process as we used for our pre-K to 1 students this past week. And so that concludes the update. I did have a few things as far as the calendar is concerned as well. So we did need to make some modifications to the calendar. So on November the 3rd, which is Election Day.
Hey, Aaron, Dr. Butler, can you stop for just 1 second?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I'll open up the board members for questions related to his update related to operations. And we got feedback from the schools. Dr. Butler, does that include feedback from parents through the schools? And if not, then I would just offer, I want to open that loop up to parents and give them also opportunities to give formal feedback.
Thank you. Yes, we got feedback back from our staff and from our administrators, but I will make a note. We can also use some relays to get feedback from parents as well.
Well, we have received feedback from many parents related to how last week went. And we've received feedback, quite honestly, ever since this year started related to making adjustments within schedules, looking at the amount of homework and classwork that our kids are getting, and Dr. Wrights and Ms. Skinner will get into that in just a little bit. We're certainly getting a lot of feedback from our families.
When we change cleaning supplies, because I know a lot of the cleaning supplies we're using now are different, do we have a list of that somewhere that families can reference, people with allergies, things like that? Or do they just call the school board office to get a list and find out?
Dr. Butler, do you know the answer to that question?
I'm sorry, for some reason the sound was not clear. Can you say it one? I apologize for asking. Can you repeat the question, please?
Sure. When we switched cleaning supplies, obviously we're using a little bit different cleaning supplies than we used to use, or adding more. Is there a list somewhere in the division that families could reference? I know that people with allergies, if their kids are coming back to the building, they want to know if there was something that their kid would be allergic to. Is that something we provide in a specific location, or would they have to call in and ask for that list?
Mr. Dolak, who's over maintenance facilities, he provides that list to our schools, but it's the same. The quaternary solution is the same solution that we've used prior to the pandemic, because it's a disinfectant, to make sure that it does address those issues. We try to use a solution that is non-toxic, as well as the biostatic protectant is something that they did research to make sure there was something that is not a hazardous material. But I will verify that with Mr. Dolak just to make sure that, but to my understanding, schools do have a list of those items that we use for our cleaning solutions.
Thank you.
Any other questions before we move on to the next section? I did want to add, and a staff member reminded me, we are going to be conducting a survey before the end of this week for families, so to get some additional feedback. Dr. Butler?
Okay. Thank you, sir. And the next couple of slides are just some modifications to the calendar that we did have to make. So on November the 3rd, which is Election Day, it was converted from a student holiday to an instructional day to meet the Virginia Department of Education instructional hour requirements for instructional hours. However, due to the presidential election, we are doing a 1 hour delay for those students who are coming for face-to-face instruction in order to accommodate voter turnout. We have been in contact with the voter commission to make the election commission just to make sure to look at numbers and to make sure that our procedures are in line with their expectations. On November the 4th, that will be a student support independent learning day. It was turned into that, is now going to be a student holiday, a teacher work day. And that's to provide time for our instructional staff to prepare for the second marking period. On November the 11th, we had originally designated that as an early release day. It was going to be a 0.5 site-based professional development day that now has been designated as a student support and independent learning day. And that's in order for us to meet all the instructional requirements from the Virginia Department of Education. December the 11th was an early dismissal day, which was an SAIPD day, or a student assessment and instructional planning day. That also had to be turned into a full instructional day to meet our Virginia Department of Education instructional requirements. January the 27th through the 28th, we had designated those as early release days. One was a 0.5 professional development day. The other was a 0.5 teacher work day. And for instructional reasons, we have to turn those into regular full days. And then January the 29th, that is still a student holiday, but rather than being a division-wide PD day, is being converted into a teacher work day to provide them time to prepare for the third marking period. Okay. And that concludes the updates in the calendar. I am available for questions at this time.
Questions for Dr. Butler?
When are the parent-teacher conferences that usually happen sometime around November, beginning of November?
So this year what we've done is, and I know went out last week about parent conferences, what we're really trying to do is not put a deadline on that this year, but to make that just an ongoing expectation. We want to make sure that parents get timely information about their student PPD assessments, and there's going to be a letter going out to the parents about that. So we do that next week. So our elementary teachers will still continue to share that data, and that's really important data for them to have. But at the same time, as grades are going out or in a different learning environment, we want to make sure that if our students are having any difficulty, that our parents are reaching out, teachers are reaching out on a consistent basis. So the expectations, there's still those conferences, but clarity that we need to be doing this all along the way.
You want to talk a little bit about the student success teams?
Certainly. So we have, it's in our return to school plan. We have student success teams expectations. And so this is one of the ways that we're making sure that we're not missing students. So each school is responsible for having a student success team, and they're comprised of a variety of different people. Each school has set them up a little bit differently. Typically, there's a counselor, an administrator, possibly a school social worker is on there, school psychologist, some lead teachers, counselors. And so what they're doing is they're going through and on an ongoing basis, they're looking at student attendance data, they're looking at student grades, they're looking to see if there are students that have disengaged from online learning, and they're using that information to then develop a student success plan for that student. So they're working with Dr. Butler's team, they're working with our director of secondary and elementary, sharing that information with us so that we're not missing those students. We're really trying to make sure that we don't want a long period of time to go before we, say, oh my goodness, what's going on with this particular student. So that's also helping us. So those student success teams, they're really creating a success plan and involving parents in that process. It's just another way of trying to support.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. And thank you, Dr. Butler, for that presentation. Appreciate that. And our next topic is reopening update relating to instruction.
Thank you, Mr. Richardson. Good evening again, board members. Dr. Wright is now going to present some information related to our elementary instructional return to school plan from last week. Dr. Wright.
Hi, good evening. I had the pleasure this evening of talking to you guys about how our first week of hybrid learning went for our grades pre-K through first grade. So as you can see from my slide, I'm going to go through some accomplishments first. And so some accomplishments from last week that I want to touch on and highlight for you is each school was prepared for receiving the students for each cohort. The teachers were ready for in-person instruction, and the community was well informed of all expectations. Students were prepared to meet their teachers and eager to see them in person. I'll give you a real quick example. I was first day of cohort 1, I was at Coventry, and this little boy got out of the car. He was in kindergarten. We asked him who his teacher was, where he was going, so we could help escort him, make sure he was safely to the classroom. Well, his teacher did such a great job previously talking to the students by letting him know that there will be markers throughout the building, that if he just followed those markers, it would lead him to that classroom. So he was extremely independent, did not want our help. So he was just very eager, very excited just to get through the hallways and find his teacher. So for many students, this was their first experience with no tears were shed, not by students nor by parents that we saw. The current remote setting really allowed for our teachers to get to know their students and set up classroom expectations along for a smoother transition from the remote to face-to-face. In fact, one of the principals remarked to me, she described the start of the hybrid model. It was like coming back from Christmas break. The students were ready to learn and they knew those expectations. Another accomplishment was the students were able to connect to their teachers and classmates through morning meetings. I have seen in the classrooms the teachers teaching asynchronously and synchronously at the same time. This is in place for many reasons, such as taking attendance, but it also provides the social and emotional support for our students as they start out their day. Also, last week, all of our YCSD executive leadership team members were at all the schools supporting the arrival and dismissal procedures throughout the week. This allowed for the members of ELT to connect to our stakeholders and also to provide support to each building. Each elementary principal was provided us with a list of accomplishments from the hybrid opening, along with suggestions of how we can support and maybe pivot making the process smoother for our families in the next transition. We actually had a total of about 46 families that moved between delivery models, in turn supporting and accommodating our family needs and comfort levels. Some of our instructional updates. During the hybrid model, it has afforded our teachers to be very targeted and intentional when planning lessons. This purposeful and thoughtful process gives teachers the opportunity to work with smaller groups of students in a very intentional way, in turn allowing them to stay on pacing within the curriculum and targeting very specific students' needs. The hybrid model also bridges the asynchronous and synchronous work. Teachers were able to provide intense and purposeful instruction, which allows students and families the opportunity to extend the activities and limit screen time during the asynchronous times. Schools are providing tangible items to work on during the asynchronous times throughout the week. For example, they did word patterns, games, they gave them books. All these items just provided extensions to the families to reinforce a skill and that was taught, and to also scaffold those skills taught throughout the classroom experience. Many teachers were surprised at how much the students had learned from the start of the year and were able to apply those skills to the in-person hybrid setting. This has allowed for instruction to focus less on the menial skills, such as maybe cutting with scissors and how to hold a pencil, and really focus more on the direct instruction. At Dare Elementary in the multiple disabilities classroom, the teachers have been purposeful with learning targets and intentions, providing formative assessments and video recording of accomplishments for parents to help reinforce at home. And I'll give you a real quick example with that one too. So what the teacher did with the multiple disabilities class is she had a pumpkin that the student helped decorate, and then she held up a car, and the student had to identify which was the pumpkin by pointing to the pumpkin. In turn, she was also recording the response and giving her a formative assessment whether or not the student knew the difference between the two. And then that recording, the parents were able to use at home to reinforce what was taught in school. So during that asynchronous time. Also, our curriculum specialists have provided reading comprehension activities for each part of our literacy model. These activities tell teachers how they might be able to use it during asynchronous instruction. For example, they provided read aloud resources, decodable text, practice and poetry and rhyme, and some journaling. And administrators have created schedules allowing paraprofessionals the opportunity to do small group lessons during this asynchronous time. This practice is allowing students another opportunity to go beyond our morning meetings to connect to staff members during the asynchronous days and to receive that direct instruction. The next bullet on this slide is talking about our student assessments. Currently, right now, our students are being assessed in order to learn their current levels. For example, in grades K to 3, we're administering the PALS assessment to all students. The PALS assessment is a research-based screening, diagnostic, and progress monitoring tool to help plan instruction that targets our students' needs. In grades 2 through 5, teachers are doing an oral reading record, which we refer to as an ORR, on each student. An ORR provides a snapshot of the student's reading level at a specific point in time and on a specific text. This allows teachers to have consistent process for reading observations. And then we have the Virginia Kindergarten Readiness Program, which we refer to as VKRP, is also being administered to kindergarten students, and it assesses the student's readiness for kindergarten, including both academic and social emotional skills developed at home, school, and within their community. Many of these assessments, along with the others created by instruction department, allow us to closely monitor student progression and then revisit some of those skills from the spring to help students move along through our curriculum. Our next steps are, at this time in the elementary setting, we have shifted our focus to making sure our second and third grade students are supported on their return. And the principals have been working hard on developing schedules, sharing ideas with each other, and also supporting our teachers. Does anyone have any questions at this time for me?
Dr. Wright, that was excellent. That was an excellent update. Hey, during the instructional update, you mentioned that many teachers were impressed with the progress or status of their learners that had returned, to an in-person environment.
Mhm.
That kind of uniform across the board, I mean, and does that not indicate some real success early on with the virtual piece and the virtual learning, as well as parental help and so forth?
One of the things that we want to make sure that we are doing, watching very closely is curriculum piece.
Mm-hmm.
And we have our curriculum coordinators who provide updates every 4 weeks on where we are with our curriculum. 4 weeks is enough time for another unit assessment to go by. And so just last week, we've gotten really our first look at how we're progressing. Overall, I would say that we're pretty much on track. We have some areas that we would continue to monitor a little bit more closely. Math in particular is an area where the Department of Education has talked about it. We need to be very careful of making sure, because there's so many skills that build. And so our math specialist, Krista Pika, provided an extensive update to me last week. And one of the things that she talked about was really how they're monitoring what they're doing. So I can share now with you, or I can share later, but just some of the things that they're doing is they're going in and they're looking at the assessments that the students are taking in Mastery Connect. They're going in and reviewing Canvas courses to look to see where the teachers are pacing and where they are. They're also giving them assistance with the asynchronous instruction activities to make sure that for our youngest learners that they are aligning to the curriculum so that what they're doing in asynchronous instruction just builds on what they're doing in face-to-face instruction, right? We don't want them doing something different, but we want them to be appropriate activities that are developmentally appropriate. They're also meeting with department chairs and grade level teams on an ongoing basis to talk about their planning, their instruction, those types of things. When they begin to see a pacing go off a little bit, they're meeting with the principal, the teachers, and NPLC needs to help support this. And what Ms. Pika has talked to me about specifically with math is that in our elementary students, we're seeing them retaining those math skills that they were taught last year. Because as I shared with you a while back, and you probably don't remember this, one of the things that we've done is we've built pre-assessments into every unit assessment. So before they teach that unit, they're doing pre-assessments to see what do they remember from what they were taught before, and do we need to go back and reteach that before we teach them the instruction. And what we're seeing through Mastery Connect is a lot of the students are retaining their skills. Not all students, but now we have a tool that tells us which don't, so the teachers can work with their students. Because what we don't want to do is go back and reteach everything, because we'll never be able to keep our pacing. So that's just an update a little bit on kind of what we're doing. But again, I'm getting updates from K-12 and all of our core subjects, including CTE, just making sure that we're moving along at a good pace, and when we're not, we're stepping in quickly.
No, I appreciate that, particularly the asynchronous piece with regard to the scaffolding and making sure that as we scale that, obviously that's going to be critical. Okay, yeah, thank you very much. And you're rolling that assessment data up to where we can hear from that, receive that data on a normal basis, so to speak.
You mean
You mean rolling that up to?
Yes, up to the division level.
Oh, yes, yes, absolutely.
PALS, I mean, there are some major rigorous assessments. It'd be nice to have that data.
Actually, just Dr. Shader, we looked at Power BI as a program that we are really
Sure.
focusing a lot of those efforts. It's a one-stop shop. So like our reading data from our elementary students, all that's being uploaded into there. We already had a reading progress monitoring system.
Sure.
But we're putting in an extra additional piece that looks at where these students were at mid-year, where they're starting the year off in their reading levels, so we can look for any regression, and we can address those with our reading specialists and do tier three instructional supports.
Yeah, right. Thank you. Yeah.
What do you think our average class sizes were this past week? If you just had to.
Average class
size.
Okay, Dave, do you want to, we were all in the classrooms, but Dave, do you want to give us a number, what you thought our average class size was?
Sure. An average class size is anywhere between 10 and 11.
Other questions for Mr. Wright? Dr. Wright, sorry.
Yes. My question is, how would you consider this? Would you say it's an unqualified success for this week that we went through?
I would consider it definitely a success with how well prepared we were, the students' enthusiasm, the engagement that our teachers had with our students. And I think that we just did a great job. There were days that we allowed us the opportunity with cohort 1 to really do well. And then we did it all over again on Thursday with cohort 2. So that allowed us just the opportunity to continue to improve.
Yeah, I would agree. I would say it's a huge success. It took a great deal of work by many people at the SBO, as well as teachers, administrators, a great deal of planning. Dr. Bladue had to work very closely with Dr. Wrights related to the operational integrity for our elementary schools, making sure we have the staffing for students there. Mr. Dolak and his team did a great job preparing the buildings and all of the, whether it's the arrows on the ground or the hand dispensers, and masks, shields, all kind of everything else in the buildings. I would say it was a really, really big success. And some of the folks that have reached out to me were thankful that we were able to get their kids back in school. Obviously, especially our youngest, most vulnerable learners. Yeah,
I'm looking at it that it should just get easier then with the older kids as we bring them back, because they're already used to being in school for a couple of years. And I was wondering if, as we go and as we learn more, could we even quicken the pace a little bit?
Well, I would want to caution us on our pace. I think that the pace that we're moving at right now is a really nice, deliberate pace moving kids back in. I believe elementary will be every 2 weeks. So on the 19th, and I'll get into this a little bit, but on the 19th, we'll essentially be, we'll be where the board wanted to be as far as a resolution to bring our most vulnerable learners back, special education, EL students in K through 3 in a hybrid model. So we'll be able to achieve that before the 9-week period. Now, I say that, but that could all change, as you all know,
right.
Looking at our health metrics. And as you move forward, we have to do this at a pace where Dr. Bladue can work with the level directors and principals related to operational integrity. So I would hesitate to rush for that. I think have a continued deliberate approach moving forward. I think that sets us up for success.
Yeah, just one thing. I know that some of the concern with moving from the virtual to the hybrid was that students getting 3 days of asynchronous work and being told, having 2 days FaceTime with their teachers, incorporating like the morning meetings on the Thursdays and Fridays or Mondays and Tuesdays whenever they're not in there, and then working with the like paraeducators and other staff in the building. Is that enough to sort of help meet those needs for the social and emotional learning needs and help them continue to feel involved in their class and with another building adult rather than just being at home in their room, essentially?
Dr. Wrights, do you want to answer that one first?
Sure. So what's happening is what they're doing during the synchronous learning of the face-to-face within the hybrid model is those asynchronous lessons are bridging what they're already learning. So a lot of those activities they're able to do at home, maybe even without parental help or really any help at all, because it's really bridging what they're learning in the synchronous setting. But also too, it allows our students the opportunity, which they haven't had this year, to a lot of available resources when they are in the building, which is the reading specialist, our school counselors, and in turn, allowing our students those opportunities if they really needed that face-to-face resource. So with that being said, during those days that our students are possibly not 100% direct with the synchronous learning with their teacher, we are, like you had said, bringing our paras in to provide that. And we're actually, some of our classrooms are piloting the fact of keeping some of our videos on, which allows our students the opportunity that are home to listen to those lessons that the teacher's providing. The teacher may not necessarily be providing them direct help, but they are getting that lesson if they want to listen into the lesson itself. So not all of our classrooms are doing that currently right now, but we are having some of our classrooms do that, and we are seeing success with that. So that's helping, again, bridge those days that they're not in, but we do feel that the days that they are in is most beneficial.
reinforces those 2 days being critical, the synchronous in-person piece, but just as importantly, logical next step is recording of a direct lessons.
Yes, and we're gonna continue to get parent feedback. This was our, last week was our first week doing that. So, many of our students just had their first set of asynchronous days. I know, I did hear, that's why I wanted Dr. Wright to share, because he had shared some of this with me already. But I want us to know that as our children get older, they should be able to do more of those online lessons. And so you said, could this get a little bit easier? I do think it will, especially as we get into secondary schools, as far as bringing them into the lesson. Our youngest learners are kindergarten and first graders. It'll be very difficult, I think, for them to manage those pieces, but some are doing it. But it's going to be important for us to get feedback from our parents and how this is going in our teachers to make adjustments. Our curriculum coordinators are ready to support and provide more activities as needed. But I think we need to continue to get that feedback from.
I feel strongly about the very deliberate paced approach, because it sounds like we're taking those lessons, we're immediately spinning them, we're actioning them, and it gives us some agility as we continue to scale and make our way to middle of the night.
I'd just like to make one comment before we move on to the next topic. Dr. Wright, you mentioned about 46 families that we work with that either had made the decision to go virtual, that decided they wanted to go into the hybrid model, or vice versa. And I just want to thank the teachers and administrators for making that happen and working with those families, especially Dr. Wright and Skinner. And there's probably some other people I'm leaving out, but everybody that was involved in that was real important to do whatever we can to work with our families. So thank you for that. So thank you, Dr. Wright, for that presentation and for sharing that update. We're going to move on to our budget update.
I actually have,
You have some more.
I have a couple more slides.
Yep. I'm sorry.
No problem. So, we can have the guys pull up the next slides. Thank you.
There we go.
I do want to acknowledge Mr. Richardson's comments. I appreciate you mentioning that, because I've said, I think for the last 7 months, that we need to continue to be flexible and understanding through all of this. And I think good faith efforts on our part to be flexible with our families, given what the unknowns are with each family dynamic, and everyone's situation is different. And I would want to say thank you to our staff for that, but also to our families for continuing to work with us, continuing to be understanding and work with our administrators at the school. I get some emails from time to time related to some concerns, and I know sometimes before I could even respond to the email, principal or assistant principal or teacher director or someone has already reached out to the family. So we're really proud of that work that we've done. All right, so I've got a couple slides to get here, and I just want to bring something to your attention really quickly. The only thing missing on this slide is the blinking lights. So you can see it says draft in the middle. You can also see it says target dates dependent on health and operational metrics. So as I share this, I want to make sure that you know this is a draft and it's targeted target dates. None of this is in stone, so I'm hoping I'm getting that point across. All right, so as you're aware, we've already transitioned in our special education programs or EL programs and our pre-K through first grade into a hybrid learning model. We're set to bring in grades 2 and 3 on the 19th on next Monday. This meets your objective, as I said earlier, to give priority to our most vulnerable learners, which includes students in the following populations, which I just listed. We'll be able to do this all before the first 9 weeks. And so I think we should all be collectively proud of that. It took a lot of work. If I would have told you 3 or 4 months ago when we were sitting in here designing this plan that we would be here, I would have thought we would have been here and everything was perfectly smooth, because it wasn't perfectly smooth. It's a lot of hard work by a lot of people to make this happen. So looking ahead, our tentative target date to transition grades 4 and 5 is going to be on November 5th. With once this is complete, our school division will be fully in the leveled model. So if you go to our Return to Learn page, there are a number of different models there. On November 5th, if we can bring in our 4th and 5th graders, again, if the operational metrics and health metrics permit us to do this, we will be in the leveled model, which is pre-K through 5, hybrid elementary, and all secondary will be in remote. Next, if the operational and health metrics permit, our plan would be to bring in grades 6 and 9 on November 9th. So this will greatly assist our students who are new to middle school and new to high school. It'll help them adjust before we bring additional grades into the building. So the remaining grades, as you can see, are to be determined. I'm not comfortable putting a date on that one yet. There's a lot of unknowns still out there related to some things. Dr. Vladu and our team, the CITers, et cetera, we're working on plans for secondary schools. But as you can imagine, as much work as it took to get us to go pre-K, K-1, imagine how much work it is staffing wise for our secondary schools. So I just want to give us a little bit more time when we think about those additional grades. But I really think there's a good opportunity for us to bring in our first-time middle schoolers and our first-time high schoolers, at least for a period of time. I don't want to speculate on what the time is, but I think if you bring them in for a little bit of time, they can get acclimated to the building. The teachers can get acclimated to teaching, both the students in front of them as well as the students who will be online. You can go to the next slide. So I also wanted to share just a reminder that these are the metrics that we continue to consider, health metrics and our operational metrics. We review the CDC and health metrics weekly to identify a 14-day trend. That information is also posted every Monday on our website. Also, in order to move beyond the priority groups identified by the board, we need to make sure that we see our metrics declining in moderate, lower, or lowest. Even then, we may not be able to move forward, as our ability to staff our classrooms is obviously essential to safely bringing additional students back in. And of course, we're implementing a number of mitigation strategies, as you heard Dr. Butler share earlier, which are also outlined in our return to school plan. So this time I'll answer any questions related to the last two slides.
When was the last time the secondary teachers were sort of told about needs, whether it's requesting to be able to teach from home because of childcare issues or immunocompromised family members or stuff like? I'm sure that you're in the weeds dealing with that stuff, but I'm just curious when the last time they actually were told about it.
We are, and so currently, if you look on our division website under instructional staff for elementary, middle, and high, there's a total of about 147 instructional staff that are remote learning. And I know Dr. Vladu is sending a memo out, or you may have already done it related to that question.
Certainly, anytime we announce a grade level for a target date to come back, then we send out a specific inquiry into what the limitations may be, and there's a variety of possible options depending on the individual condition of the staff member. And then we update those on a weekly basis, and they're posted on the website. We do have a rolling, we do accept these requests on an ongoing basis. If somebody, for instance, needs it based on a medical diagnosis or something else, we do take those requests along the way. But we do have a T-10 or a 10-day process to work to those accommodations and listen to their staff. And each, I got to tell you, each of it is very specific. Each of it is very different, and our staff do have some options as we move forward in trying to staff our schools.
How about overall, do you see as we perhaps get closer to a hybrid schedule for the?
Yeah, that's hard to.
I mean, are the numbers growing?
Well,
or not necessarily.
I think it's hard to speculate on where we'll go as far as those numbers go because of the individual cases that we keep experiencing. But that number I gave you was 13% of our instructional staff already indicated remote, that they can work from remote. So, but again, people change both ways. And again, you've got to be flexible. As we're being flexible with our families and our students, we've got to make sure that we're working with our teachers and instructional staff in a similar fashion.
So that 13% is consistent. It's kind of right in there, 13% or so.
It does change. The other thing I would want to bring up, that is also a question of licensure, as you mentioned with operational metrics. For instance, you have at the elementary level, you have more flexibility because most of our teachers are licensed, pre-K 5. Once we get to secondary, then it gets a little more individualized because one person represents a program or two people represent a program. So we have to work through those things. So it does vary, and each grade level has its own intricacies as we move forward.
I think makes it more challenging.
Certainly.
Yes. So Mr. Schaefer said earlier, this is going to get easier.
Well, we can certainly get in front of some of the workarounds technically, perhaps, that would enable those things.
Potentially, yes.
So, we're still listening to the Virginia Department of Health and the CDC. Is there any indication of what that magic button is? Magic anything that would make it so that we didn't have to do hybrid, but we could do 4 or 5 days in person?
That information hasn't been shared with us thus far. The metrics that are up there currently, I think it's lowest or low, lower, moderate, high, higher. That's the scale. If you go on our website and you click on the very last button that is low, that means that you can bring in still on a hybrid. So even on that scale, it doesn't give you the opportunity. However, it does say pretty much in the from moderate down, moderate, lower, low, that the word consider. These are options you should consider. Again, I think that gives localities some options when it comes to that. But again, you've got to make sure that you have the operational integrity to make that happen.
I know I said this at the school board meeting, but you've got people in the community who are reading the news. They're saying that Virginia Beach is bringing their kids back 4 days a week, and they're wondering what's the difference between York County and Virginia Beach. Is their person with their Department of Health contact giving different information or giving different recommendations, or is it a division making decisions based on the same information they're getting?
I can't speak for the information that Virginia Beach is receiving, but I can tell you when we're on our calls every Wednesday, we have the folks from the Peninsula Health District on there working, sort of combing through that data with us and sharing the 14-day trends, as well as talking to us about mitigation strategies and answering any questions that we have. Now, on that call is everyone on this side of the water, Coastal, Newport News, Hampton, WJCC, and us. So the 5 of us are all on that call together. And I'm sorry, Gloucester. So we're going to listen to the information that they share with us. But again, ultimately, it's our decision. It's our decision locally on where we go. And we want to be, obviously, look at all the information to make the best decision possible.
Even when we're reading that, and it says lowest, they're still saying hybrid would be.
Yeah, and I don't have it in front of me, but there's 6 bullets, and it says there's guidelines under phase 2 or phase 3. The school divisions should consider, and then there's a laundry list of those under.
All right, and as far as the higher levels in high school, I know for me, if I've got kids that's struggling and it takes a while for them to bounce back if their grades are bad. So I would just caution on waiting too long to put a date out there, because I know some families are gonna need some hope. Some kids are gonna need some hope. So when you're trying to get your grade point average back up, especially if you're applying for colleges and everything. I think the sooner we can get them back in.
I think there was a division, Portsmouth was already decided, they're doing virtual all the way through till the first of the year.
I believe Suffolk is as well. Yeah. So again, we've built strategies in place to address those situations. So when you look at the kids' interim grades, we have those statistics. Ms. Skinner and her team have contacted the schools. We're having conversations about, how can we help those children? The school student success team is a big part of it. And makeup work and giving kids, additional opportunities. Also on those Wednesday days, for lack of better words, there's opportunities for kids to get that extra support and intervention that they need and all the support that they need. So we'll certainly continue to work through, that aspect of it, but we still want to work through, to me, in a responsible, sort of deliberate fashion as we're moving back. And I can't speak for Chesapeake or Virginia Beach and for their, the advice they're receiving from their health department.
All right, well, thank you for that update as well, Dr. Shandor. Was there anything else in that update before we move on to budget?
No, that's it.
Just want to make sure. So now we have a budget update, so I'll turn it back over to you.
We do. Thank you, Mr. Richardson. All right, I'm going to turn it over to our Chief Financial Officer, Mr. Bowen, who is going to review some information with you this evening on, I believe, 3 topics.
Thank you, Dr. Schaefer. Mr. Richardson, members of the board, several items to update you in the finance area. First, let me start with budget. So as of Friday, October 9th, student enrollment stood at 12,327 students. This is 791 students fewer than this budget. It represents about a $4 million loss in state funding. I'll remind you, there's several things that we're doing to help mitigate this potential loss. First, we have a hiring freeze with exceptions. Currently, there's about 90 positions that are open in the division. We are hiring for some of these positions, mostly teachers, bus drivers and custodians. and paraeducators, but not all. So largely, the majority of these positions will remain open until further notice. Also, because we're operating in a largely virtual environment, our school buildings and transportation are running at less than full capacity. So it's hard to provide a specific number on what that savings might be, because really what ultimately determines savings in transportation and in operations is fuel costs and with weather. So depending on what happens with the fuel costs and weather throughout the year, we won't know that till the end of the year. However, if we just look at 70 positions on an average, if they're $40,000 for salary and benefits, that would capture $2.8 million. So I feel more and more optimistic that we will be able to capture the majority of savings to cover the potential loss in light of some action taken on by the General Assembly. Now, we are still hearing chatter that the General Assembly will reconsider the legislation that was proposed this past special session that was passed over, and that was to hold school divisions harmless in their ADM. And if that happens, then we're in a much, much better position. But we will have to wait until if that's taken up again in January, February. Speaking of the General Assembly, the General Assembly is still in special session. There's one item of legislation that I did want to point out, because this item was included in both the House and the Senate version of the bill, and that is a hold harmless provision for sales tax laws. So if you recall, in previous work session, I mentioned that the state had updated its projection with sales tax, and as a result, we were going to lose $750,000. So this proposed legislation, which should pass, will eliminate that $750,000 loss. So that's very good news. Another item related to the budget, but specific to federal funds, is the CARES Act and Corona Relief Funds. As you know, in May, we received our first allocation of CARES Act money. And at the time, we thought this was going to be our only allocation. It was $583,000. Now, since that time, there were other funds, federal funds, that became available to us. There was a number of funds, 9 programs in all, that were available under a competitive process that we applied for in August. 9 programs, 1 was a set aside, and then 8 competitive programs. We applied for 7, and we received awards on 6, and that was totaling $303,000. I think last week we mentioned that we received an additional $350,000. However, that was a misinterpretation of some information that came from the Department of Education. So our total award on the competitive side is $303,000. And just real quickly, to run through some of the awards that we received, special education received almost $44,000 to help pay for SPED teachers and staff that were brought back early, to help update IEPs and to align those to virtual instruction. We received almost $33,000 for remediation services for Summer Academy to assist students affected by the spring closure. We received $50,000 for instructional delivery supports, which we purchased a number of software programs, Seesaw being one of those programs too, to help complement the virtual instruction. So $50,000 will help reimburse us for those programs that we purchased. School nutrition received $26,000, and that was to reimburse us for salaries for transportation officials and food service officials that operated the summer food service program. And then our largest award was the Vision Technology Program. That was $118,600. That was to help us with the one-to-one technology program that we financed back in May and June. And then we also received $21,700 for cleaning supplies and $9,700 for PPE for our students. Now, all of these funds that we're receiving, the $303,000, we've already spent the money. This is just coming to us as a reimbursement. So we'll be reimbursing ourselves here in the coming weeks.
Were those justifications all generated, Mr. Bowen, in-house by your team?
For those
the justifications for the competitive allocations?
Yes, all the grants were written in-house and justified for the use of funds.
Congratulations, that's great.
So we don't have a grant writer on staff.
That's
So what we did, we actually reached out to a couple of teachers who had experience in grant writing, Veronica Ward and Suzanne Warner. And they did actually all the writing for us. We provided them with the info, they put everything together. So kudos to those young ladies for helping us with the process. And they are continuing to help us as we see other competitive awards come forward. And we do have some grants that we're waiting to hear on in the next couple of weeks.
Excellent.
Also in late August, there was additional chatter about federal funds, another large pot of funding that may become available to school divisions. And just last week, the DDOE announced that the governor had allocated more than $200 million to school division. And this comes from the CARES Act, but it's coronavirus relief funds. So a little different use of funds, they're a little more restrictive. Our award under the $200 million is $2.2 million. So we're really excited about that. Again, I mentioned there are some challenges. First of all, they are more restrictive. Second, they have not been officially allocated to us yet, so they're not in our grant system. But once they are allocated, we have until November 30th to spend. So staff is working on identifying those expenditures that we can reimburse ourselves with. And then the last thing is that related to this one is that the school board will have to request that the board of supervisors appropriate the money to our budget. So this is the 2.2 million and the 300,000. So in October, the business meeting, I will have a resolution for you to adopt, formally requesting the school boards, the board of supervisors to approve these funds.
But it does come to our grant account.
It does.
Okay, all right then.
So you said the relief is different than the other information because it just from what we can spend it on? Is that what you're
Yes.
saying?
So, for example, the CARES Act money that we received in May, we can use those funds to help pay for salaries and benefits of staff that we may have to lay off. So we have so we use part of those funds to designate for that because we started to see enrollment start to drop, and not knowing that there was going to be maybe some help from the General Assembly, we needed to make sure that we weren't going to have to lay off a furlough. So, but for these funds, they have to actually be first responders or directly responsible for COVID relief, or their job has to have been totally changed from what their normal what their normal plan is, as maybe like a Dr. Vladu is HR director or chief. If he's now working on the development of virtual instruction, that becomes a new task for him. So there's many of us that qualify for that because most of us spend all summer long, trying to work up this virtual instruction plan. So the time that we spent developing the virtual instruction plan would be eligible for reimbursement. But the delivery, so for teachers to deliver that instruction is not considered a substantial change. So we have just a few different restrictions for us than say, for the county, where they could have reimbursed the salaries of their first responders, sheriffs, and fire and rescue. And then at the November work session, we'll have an update on the spending plan for that $2.2 million. And that takes me into the next topic, is health insurance update. So we are continuing to have challenges with our health insurance. And one of the challenges that we were going to address is potentially going back out to bid. So Dr. Vladu and I met with the county staff, and we developed a plan for going back out to bid. And that has the RFP being issued in January with responses from the vendors due back in February. Then we'll have an evaluation period that will take place most of February and into March. And then we'll have recommendations to the board in April, to the board of supervisors. And then the final update this evening is on the impact aid survey. So about a year ago, the school division acquired a program like Whiteboard. Maybe y'all will introduce that this year. This program has two main functions. The first is a payment system, credit card payment system that the parents can pay for the fees online. And we rolled this out last winter for our early college program to great success. So then we carried that into summer school tuition, and again, we had great success with payment fee online. So what we wanted to do was to roll out the second phase, which was the online forms. And when I was evaluating this myself and several from IT, one of the things that was very attractive to us was eventually to move the impact aid survey electronically, because that's been done by pen and paper. And it's a very arduous administrative task for the teachers and for the school division. So just last week, IT and finance staff met with officials from the Office of Impact Aid and Dave Kilborn in the IT department conducted a demo, and the Office of Impact Aid approved our use of the light course system to conduct our survey online. So we're really excited about that process. We're just waiting for the MOU to arrive, and then we'll sign that. And once that's signed, then we'll schedule a date for the survey. That's all I have to say.
I just have one comment or question. I know you, Dr. Shandor, sent a letter to our state legislatures about asking them to hold the school divisions harmless on their populations of students. Would it be beneficial for us as a board to send a letter to our legislatures as well?
Sure, I think it'd be a great idea.
Is the board in agreement to that? I can draft a letter and send it out. We can all sign it. Just asking them to do that. I think it would be appropriate.
Yes.
Also, November is Take Your Legislator to School month.
Yeah,
Might be a good time to bring on down.
Go to legislator, to target our legislators, we certainly give them, CC them, obviously. Yep,
Are you okay with us doing that or inviting them down?
You're welcome to do whatever you like. We typically in November do, as you're aware, we usually do principal for a day. We've invited several of our elected officials at the state level down for the past 3 or 4 years. So whatever the board would like to do as far as that.
I mean, if all 5 of us could get somebody down, it'd be great.
Great. Good. All right, well, thank you, Mr. Bowen, for that presentation. I appreciate that update. It doesn't seem as too of a gloom and doom, but still not the best, but we're working through it. So.
But there was some good news in there.
And I want to reiterate what Mr. Bowen said related to the work that Mr. David Kilborn created as far as with the impact aid.
Oh yeah.
He's done a wonderful job. And, not only just with this, but with a number of other programs that we have here creating. So it's very helpful to have people in house with such high expertise that can make everyone else's lives around them so much easier and manageable.
Is he working the Power BI piece also that you mentioned earlier with regard to?
There's another member of IT that supports us.
Okay,
Yeah.
great.
Another day.
Yep, that's what I was, okay, now I did the correlation, yeah, thank you. That's great.
So now we're going to move into substitute staff compensation.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Richardson. Dr. Ledoux is now I believe he has the next 2 topics. So he'll have substitute staff compensation as well as the next item. So Dr. Ledoux.
Thank you, Dr. Shandor. Mr. Richardson, members of the board. Tonight, I'd like to take the opportunity to propose a few changes for our substitute pay or compensation. So as the division works to meet staffing needs, substitutes to provide a critical service in our schools and offices, as we heard from our school reopening. These needs resulted from that are presented tonight from a substitute compensation review among our competitor market, which is really our neighboring school divisions. Additionally, as of May 1, 2021, we'll have a new minimum wage that will take effect, and this proposal takes this requirement into consideration. So on this page, what you will see, they're proposing the daily rate for school nurse substitute to increase from $100 to $115. Additionally, for long-term school nurse substitute, we are proposing to raise the rate from $110 to $120. Last on the slides, we're proposing for the rates of the substitute oral communicators to increase from $75 to $84. On the next slide, this slide, you will see that substitute teachers, as we discussed, fill a critical role in staff in our schools, particularly as we may anticipate some shortages. To that end, to remain competitive regionally, we're proposing a $16 increase, daily increase for substitutes. Similarly, we're proposing a $22 increase for substitutes that fill the roles from 11 to 20 days, and a $23 per day increase for long-term substitutes that work in excess of 21 days. Next, for our paraeducators to remain competitive, we're proposing a $12 per day increase. Additionally, we're proposing a $14 per day increase for our staff that sub from 11 to 20 days, and a $10 daily increase for those that continue their assignments for 21 days or more. Last on this slide, when our staff members substitute during the planning of duty for a teacher, previously it was $8, we're proposing that number to increase to $20. So this concludes my presentation, and I'll take any questions that you may have.
When did you say this would take effect?
The proposal, you would have to see this and move toward action on this proposal at the board's meeting if the board sees fit.
So we're challenged, it sounds like, in comparison to the other school divisions. This makes us competitive with them. Obviously, we need to rely on the sub pool to help us, you know, obviously through the hybrid model and operational integrity. So it's something that we're gonna have to move on relatively quickly. The obvious question is, this wasn't considered in our initial budget discussions, but it sounds like in the operational budget that this is tenable. Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
So, and it's also important to realize that a substitute teacher may be signed up with, may have more than one employer. So, and I know some folks that are subbing in several other school divisions, including us, so it's important to continue to remain competitive to fill those vacancies.
Are we considering other factors too, aside from just compensation? So for instance, we offer professional development. Do we include our subs in, you know, give them the opportunity to participate in that, for instance? Has it ever been a consideration? I use PD as one example, there are others.
I can speak for the instructional side of it. If they are a long-term sub, we include them typically in any of the professional development that we're doing. In regards to some of the other professional development, it may not be appropriate for a substitute, just substituting for one day.
Sure.
But I do believe there's some operational trainings that they would take part in.
I would just offer, maybe we expand,
Tools type
to look at them as a pool. You're right, we only may utilize them one day of the year, but let's just assume we're probably gonna utilize them more often if they're part of the pool, that we consider beyond compensation, some other factors that might attract them. It's somewhat of a retention model, and it might be more prone to sub here versus, you're right, I know they're subbing across multiple divisions, but they might defer to the county if they felt like they were included in some of the other opportunities that we have. Something to think about.
Certainly.
So Dr. Ledoux, I know it's hard to give a number because we don't know how many subs we're going to use. We're using less this year, but probably because of virtual learning. But based on numbers from last year, did you do any figures of what this would actually cost us in a year, roughly?
These daily increases is really tough to do that in the current environment because currently when we look at absenteeism, this doesn't match last year. Absenteeism is much, much lower. It's going to depend on the model we're going into and on the need. I can tell you thus far, we have not used, we have a fraction of the stuff that we used last year, but it will change as we look at other models.
Right. I'm just thinking for a budget for next year, yeah, we're looking at a significant increase in that. We'll cross that bridge when we get to it, but I'm comfortable with this year, I'm sure, with not using as many substitute teachers. Thank you.
So can this be brought in October, the next school board meeting?
Yes.
Yes.
All right, and you have the next topic.
Yeah, so our last item for the evening is the strategic plan update, goal 5, objective 5.1, class size. Dr. Ledoux.
Thank you. So as you'll remember, in our last work session, I reported on the status of staffing and vacancies. Tonight, I'd like to take the opportunity to present on goal 5, objective 1, which is the class size objective. The purpose of this objective is to monitor the board's commitment to smaller class sizes. Information presented tonight will reflect the status of the division as of the 10-day count of students enrolled and attending during that 10-day window. So before I begin, I want to refamiliarize ourselves with some standards of quality ratios that are proposed by the Virginia legislature. So 24:1 is the ratio in kindergarten, with no classes being larger than 29 students. If the average membership in any kindergarten class exceeds 24 students, then we may assign, or the state says we may assign an additional instructional assistant or paraeducator. Again, the standards of quality says 24:1 in grades 1, 2, and 3, with no class being larger than 30 students, and 25:1 in 4 through 6, with no class larger than 35 students. It's important to look at the standards of quality because they provide the expectation across the state level. However, to our strategic goal, the board committed to maintain class sizes that are much smaller than the state allowable limits. So as a result, this year, as in past years, we followed the same class size targets. It's also important to remember that decisions to shift staff members or allot additional resources are always made in consultation with the principals and by monitoring the data, both the enrollment as well as the attendance data. It's also important to remember that this is an average, so the individual class sizes will vary. So for every 18:1 in the class, you might have a 22:1 for that average. On the next slide, it shows that as the board, you also be committed to the same class sizes during the strategic cycle at the secondary level. It is important to remember that the state has no class size limit in grades 7 to 12. And so our ratio is secondary core classes to be below 30 or less students pending available resources. The only exception is for standards of quality to this limit is that the English department, English classes at the secondary level, the average has to be 24:1. So on this slide, as a point of reference, at the center bottom of the slide, you can see those targets I just summarized. So in elementary, we monitor individual grades as well as K2 and K5 averages. In middle and high school, monitor class sizes in core content areas as well as PE. As you can see, we are below all division targets across the board. State code also requires us to provide data to the board on individual classes. So in board docs, the public section, we include a supplemental listing for each class at the elementary, middle, and high school level. Please note that many of those classes also include the use of paraeducators, reading specialists, and special educators. And as stated earlier, these numbers are monitored along the year. Every 2 weeks, we pull out the data and we monitor those class sizes. Lastly, the averages presented tonight represent zone school enrollment. As you will remember, we have 2 schedules, both the Virtual Academy and the Flexible Framework. So we have a variation there. However, we try to balance those classes to the extent possible. So on this slide, I want to take a few moments to share some elementary historical class size data. So our start of the year numbers were consistently below last year's numbers. And in most cases, we have some of those lowest averages that the results in 2014. As we shared with the board in the last 2 meetings, we did not meet enrollment targets. It's also important to recognize that when you're trying to balance 2 schedules, it requires more staff because you divide by a fewer number of classes, so it's a little more difficult to have those targets. So on the next slide, another metric that we will use, if we can move to the next slide. Okay, so another metrics on this slide that we're very, very diligent about are the ratios for our Title I schools versus the others. So federal regulations require equal to lower class sizes. And you can see here, we met the regulated class size relationship. So as we look at middle schools, you find current numbers in the right column. As you can see in the last column on the right side, all classes are similar to the last year.
Hold on one second, Dr. Lynn. I apologize. Our team is trying to remove that last box inside. On the side, Dr. Lynn, actually, we just can't see the 2020 column. Oh, there we go. Perfect.
All right.
As you can see.
All right. So now, again, now that you can see the last column on the right, you will see that we're at or below last year's numbers. We do have approximately 6 classes, and I say approximately because we are trying to staff some of our classroom. Some of the pre-algebra, a couple of classes pre-algebra, as well as a geometry class, and a U.S. history class. There are anywhere between 31 to 34. I've been in contact with those principals. They feel it's better to keep those students in the classes than to have a substitute because, again, they stay on track with the students and with the lessons. They stay with their peers. However, we're actively looking for a part-time math teacher to address that need. And the next slide, I want to discuss our high school enrollment as we look at that historical comparison. Now that you can see the right-hand column, you'll see that we're at or below where we were last year. And at the high school level, we do have one core class that is at 31. Again, this is a singleton class. Dividing that class or also using the substitute in this class doesn't make a lot of sense. And it's best to keep those students in that classroom at 31. So this concludes my report, and I welcome any questions or comments you may have.
Just backing up a little bit, when we look at average daily membership, I know we're down 700 students or more. Where a majority of those students are they at the elementary grade level, Dr. Ledoux? Or I know initially that was the indications were that was primarily.
And so remember when we shared information with the board earlier, we showed those, I think Mr. Bowen actually showed the graphs. So there was a significant number of those students who kindergarten didn't show up.
That held true. Oh, okay.
And then also the other decline would be students who homeschooled or left the division. So that was a big number. I can't remember the exact number, Mr. Bowen, do you?
250 what comes to mind, but it's in that range, and it has grown slightly since I last reported that number.
Yeah.
Okay. Yep. And then one other quick one, where we had 31 students in a class size. Obviously, we looked very closely at how those students were performing. I guess the teachers, everybody was comfortable that they were performing well, and frankly, there was more risk in splitting them up and introducing a substitute. Okay, all right, thank you. Got it.
All right, well, thank you, Dr. Ledoux, for that presentation, both of them that you did. Appreciate that. There was no other questions, correct? All right, so appreciate all the updates that we had this evening. As a reminder, we'll be back on Monday, October the 26th at 7 p.m. for our regular school board meeting that will be held at the boardroom at your call. And we're in need of a closed session this evening. So if there's a member that would like to take it from the closed session.
I move that the York County School Board convene in closed session pursuant to Virginia Code Section 2.2-3711A8 of the Virginia Freedom of Information Act for consultation with legal counsel regarding exceptions to charging tuition pursuant to Virginia Code Section 22.1-3, requiring the provision of legal advice by such counsel.
Is there a second? Yes, sir. Okay. Ms. Ford?
A motion is made by Mr. Higginbotham and seconded by Mr. Waltz for the York County School Board to convene in closed session. Mr. Schaefer?
Yes.
Mr. Myatt?
Yes.
Mr. Higginbotham?
Yes.
Ms. Crawl?
Yes.
Mr. Richardson?
Yes.
The motion passed 5-0.
Thank you, Ms. Ford. We're now in closed session. Thank you, and everyone have a great week.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.